All right, let's jump into this. Today we're going to tackle something that I think anyone who's dealt with IT infrastructure knows. It could be a bit of a jungle out there. Managing data centers, all those servers, software updates, it can be a lot.
It really can. It's amazing how much data centers have changed. Even in the last few years. I mean, it used to be a few servers tucked away. Now you've got this whole mix, physical servers, virtual machines, applications, not to mention the data storage needs. It's a handful.
It's a lot to wrangle. And that's exactly where I think, it seems like Supermicro Software Suite comes in. Specifically, we're talking about SuperCloud Composer, and I got to be honest, that name, SuperCloud Composer, it's a mouthful. I'm probably just going to call it SCC. Hope that's all right.
SCC makes sense.
So, SCC, I've seen it described as this like single pane of glass for your whole setup. And, while I like a good buzzword as much as anyone, what's that actually mean for someone? Someone who's actually in the trenches managing those servers.
It's about cutting through the noise. Instead of having like a dozen different tools for all these different things, SCC brings it all into one place. Less time, jumping between systems, less chance of those wrong server mistakes.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Saves a ton of time, and honestly, probably a good chunk of stress, too.
Okay, so less firefighting, more actual getting things done time. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But it's not just about, I guess, simplifying things, right? From what I've seen, SCC also claims to really boost performance and reliability.
It does, and that's really about consistency. With SCC, you're making sure every server is configured the same way, managed the same way, and that's essential nowadays, right? It's an always-on world. No more guessing if that weird issue is because one server's got some, quirky setting.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. That's never fun.
Consistency means fewer surprises, fewer headaches, and just a smoother running system overall.
And smoother usually means happier, I've found, especially for whoever gets that call when things inevitably go a little sideways.
Yeah.
Now, one thing I was thinking about, especially for our listeners who might be picturing, these massive data centers, our sources really emphasize that SCC is flexible. It's not just for the big guys.
Right.
Right. It works for businesses of all sizes.
Absolutely. You don't need a mega data center to get value out of SCC. It scales with you. So whether you're just starting out or you've already got a pretty complex setup, SCC can adapt.
Okay, so that's huge. No one wants to invest in something they're going to outgrow in a year or two. So we've talked about how SCC can wrangle the chaos, but there's this phrase that really stuck with me, and I got to ask about it. Cradle to grave IT infrastructure management. That's quite a phrase. What does that even mean in the context of SCC?
So it's about how SCC supports you through, literally the entire life of your IT infrastructure. From the very beginning, like when you're setting up a brand new server, SCC helps streamline all that. Provisioning, the operating system, the network setup, it's all right there. But it's not just about the initial setup. SCC sticks with you. Applying updates, monitoring how things are performing, even when it's time to retire a server, SCC helps manage that whole process. It's about having this one tool that simplifies things every step of the way.
So instead of needing different processes, different tools for each stage, you've got SCC as that central command center throughout a server's life.
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive. And it sounds like a lot of that comes from, the materials mentioned, pre-configured components and automation. Yeah. So it's not just monitoring, it's helping you actually get things done.
Yes. It's like having this library of pre-built templates and workflows ready to go, those tedious, repetitive tasks that, let's face it, IT admins often get stuck with. SCC can automate a lot of that. So instead of spending hours manually configuring each server, you can use those templates, those workflows to get things up and running much, much faster.
Yeah, it's definitely music to the ears of anyone who's ever had to do that kind of manual configuration. Less time on the tedious stuff, more time for, everything else. But let's talk about the future for a second. I noticed mentions of Redfish open standards and support for third-party devices. And I know for a lot of people listening, future-proofing their tech is a huge deal. So what do those terms mean when we're talking about SCC?
So this is where I think Supermicro is being really smart. By, sticking to Redfish, which is an open standard for managing IT resources, it means SCC isn't this closed system. You're not trapped. You've got the flexibility to use it with a wide range of hardware, software, and even stuff from other vendors. And that's huge because, we know technology changes fast.
It does.
This way, SCC can change with it. You're not stuck with something that's going to be obsolete in a couple of years.
Okay, so not just potentially saving you headaches today, but also designed to adapt to whatever tomorrow's IT challenges might be.
Yeah.
That's reassuring. All right, so We've covered a lot about what SuperCloud Composer is, but I'm really curious to see how it actually works. Peel back the curtain a little bit. All right, so let's get our hands a little dirty here. One of the things when I was looking through the materials, this example of SCC deployment visual, it really caught my eye because, yeah, we can talk about managing servers all day, but this diagram, this is where the rubber meets the road, right? It shows what setting up SCC actually looks like.
Yeah, and it's a good illustration of just how adaptable SCC is when it comes to the hardware. You see Supermicro's Ultra servers, Twin servers, even the Superblade systems, even some with GPUs in there. It's a good snapshot of how SCC can work with all sorts of setups.
It shows it's not a one-size-fits-all, or I guess a one-size-fits-one kind of thing. And speaking of getting a clear picture, this POD view feature, this is interesting. Imagine you've got this virtual map of your server racks. You see where everything is, what it's doing, even the hardware details.
Yeah.
Like X-ray vision, but for your data center.
And it's more than just a visual thing, right? POD view lets you group and manage your servers logically. So it doesn't matter where they are physically. You can organize them based on what makes sense. Like if you've got a distributed setup or you're doing something fancy with your cooling.
So you could group them by their function, the applications they're running, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's that extra layer of organization on top of the physical layout.
Very cool. And, okay, got to ask about this rich analytics data that keeps popping up. We're talking thermal readings, power usage, even GPU performance monitoring. That's a lot of data.
Well,
who is that kind of detail most useful for? And how so?
That data is gold for anyone who's responsible for keeping those servers happy. IT admins, system admins, those folks. Because now you can see trends, you can spot potential problems before they actually become problems.
It's like a crystal ball, but for server meltdown.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive. And that granular GPU monitoring, that's essential if you're doing things like AI or machine learning. Got to make sure those GPUs are pulling their weight.
Especially with how demanding those workloads can be these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for a real-world example, and the one in the materials about how SCC can streamline firmware updates, that caught my attention. Being able to update, all your servers at once, instead of going one by one, that's got to be a dream come true for some people.
Huge time saver, especially if you're dealing with, hundreds of servers, thousands even. But it's also about reducing the risk of messing something up. We all make mistakes, right?
You're right.
But with SCC handling the updates, you get that consistency. You know it's being done right across the board.
It's like the easy button, but for firmware, with the added bonus of knowing you're not accidentally opening up security holes.
Okay, before we jump to SuperCloud Orchestrator, I do want to ask about something else. The materials mention SCC supporting NVMe over fabrics and this whole idea of composable, disaggregated infrastructure. I feel like we're getting into the weeds a bit here.
We are, but it's exciting stuff.
Yeah.
So NVMe over fabrics, think of it this way. Instead of each server having its own little silo of storage that might not even be used that much, you've got these super fast NVMe drives, but they're connected over the network. So it's like this pool of storage that all your servers can share and tap into as needed.
So instead of a buffet, it's like a high-speed storage buffet.
Yeah.
And each server can grab what it needs. Exactly. And that's where the composable part comes in. You're basically breaking down your IT resources, the compute, the storage, the networking, into these separate blocks. And then you can dynamically put them together, reconfigure them based on what you need. It's all about agility and efficiency.
So if an application suddenly needs more storage or more processing power, you don't have to just hope that one server can handle it. You can pull resources from the pool as needed.
Exactly. It lets you get the most out of your hardware, adapt to changes, and really, really optimize your data center.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how all these features we've talked about, the single pane of glass, the automation, the flexibility, it all ties together to create this really powerful platform.
And we're just scratching the surface. SuperCloud Composer is already doing some amazing things. But it's when you bring in SuperCloud Orchestrator, that's when things get really interesting. That's where that from weeks to days promise really comes into play.
All right, you've definitely piqued my curiosity. Let's shift gears and talk about SuperCloud Orchestrator. What is it? How does it take things to that next level? All right, so we've covered SuperCloud Composer. Sounds like a real game changer for managing what you've already got. But now, SuperCloud Orchestrator SDO, that's the one that's got me really thinking, this idea of going from weeks to days.
Yeah.
That's a bold claim. We're talking about a whole different way of deploying data centers, aren't we?
It's a whole new ball game. Think about it. Traditionally, getting those data center services up and running, it's been a pain. Manual tasks, tons of them. That slide, building data center services from scratch, That pretty much sums it up. Configuring hardware, the software, making sure the network's playing nice, it's a lot to handle.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it takes time, weeks, sometimes months to get it all right.
Weeks, months? Oof. Yeah, I can see that getting a little stressful.
Hmm.
But then SEO comes along, and it's all about speed and, well, doing things smarter. The materials mention automated workflows, deployment roles, even time scheduling. It almost sounds too good to be true. So paint me a picture. What does a streamlined deployment actually look like with SEO running the show?
Okay, imagine this. No more manually configuring every single server, every piece of software, step by step. Instead, you've got SEO with these predefined templates and workflows ready to just automate the whole process. You basically tell SEO what you want. Say a cluster of servers all ready for those AI workloads we were talking about, and boom, it takes it from there. Provisions the hardware, deploys the software, the whole 9 yards.
So it's like having a whole team of super efficient engineers on standby, ready to spin up these complex setups just like that.
Exactly. It frees up your IT teams to actually focus on, the important stuff, making sure everything runs smoothly, optimizing applications, not stuck doing these tedious manual tasks.
Working smarter, not harder. I like it. And this idea of time scheduling, that's brilliant. Being able to schedule these deployments, these updates for the middle of the night when everyone's asleep. No more downtime headaches.
Minimize disruption, maximize efficiency.
Exactly. Now, we got to talk about the day-to-day management. The materials mentioned that day 2 operations for SEO are coming soon. What can we expect to see there?
Right, because deploying is one thing, keeping it all running, that's the real challenge.
That's the long game.
Exactly. Day 2 is all about what happens after you've deployed. The monitoring, the scaling, everything that keeps the lights on. And, while the details for SEO are still under wraps, you can bet it's going to have some powerful tools to streamline all of that.
So it sounds like they're aiming for this really comprehensive platform, something that covers the entire life cycle of the data center, from day 1 to however long you need it to run.
And that's where things get really exciting when you start to think about SEO and SuperCloud Composer working together. Remember that SuperCloud platform slide?
It's all starting to come together.
It's not 2 separate tools. It's about how they work as one, this unified management system.
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with this.
So picture this. You use SEO, you rapidly deploy this complex, say, software-defined storage solution, something like Ceph, massive time saver already. And then you seamlessly transition to SCC for that day-to-day management. You're monitoring its health, optimizing performance, handling any hiccups, all within SCC. That's the SuperCloud platform, making the entire data center journey smoother.
It's like having the best of both worlds, the rapid deployment of SEO and then the granular control of SCC. And hey, since we're talking about powerful duos, what about this Ceph dashboard within SuperCloud Orchestrator? What's so special about that integration?
Ceph, that's a big deal in software-defined storage. It's all about, being able to scale things up and being super resilient. And by having a dedicated Ceph dashboard right there in SEO, it makes it incredibly easy to deploy and manage really large-scale storage. And these days, with data growing like crazy, that's essential.
It's like giving businesses the tools they need before they even know they need them. So to wrap things up here, we've really gone deep on Supermicro's software suite, from the ins and outs of SuperCloud Composer to the revolution that SuperCloud Orchestrator promises to bring. What are the big takeaways you want our listeners to remember?
Big one. Supermicro is not just playing in the hardware game anymore. They're bringing serious software solutions to the table, all designed to make managing even the most complex IT setups, easier and more efficient.
No more wrestling with the data center beast alone.
Exactly. And whether you're just trying to wrangle what you've got with SCC or completely change how you deploy with SEO, Supermicro's got something for you.
Well said. And on that note, I think that's all the time we have for our deep dive into Supermicro's software suite. If you want to learn more, and I'm sure you do, head over to their website. Until next time, happy exploring.